It's clear that PPC is like really conscious about the intersectional forms of structural violence that many people live at the nexus of, with racism and LGBTQ plus discrimination, xenophobia, etc. Can you reflect on any experiences, especially given your own upbringing in like a religious context, where you've like had to reconcile the conservative nature of Catholicism with your devout support for humanity? Because I feel like this is something that is so important to PPC, but isn't necessarily the norm in conversations about activism. So I would love some more like context about how you deal with that.
Yeah. So I want to step back for a minute because I think the intersectionality piece is like it's a strategy. I mean, it's an analysis and a strategy. And I want to explain a little bit about that strategy because then it also leads to then why pulling kind of moral values and religious organizing into a movement strategy is a bunch of what we're doing here. And so we again really fall back on making sure we have an accurate Dr. King talks about that you need basically an accurate diagnosis to be able to have a fitting prescription to the problem, right? So if you don't understand what you're dealing with, then you come up with solutions that don't fit the situation, right? And so, and I think for a very long time, our public policy has had, for whatever reason, I think often on purpose, but has had a diagnosis of what causes racism and poverty that is not as fully of a deeper analysis as one needs to actually have. Um, so we started this campaign by actually putting together a series of maps. And so we started with a map of the states that had enacted racist voter suppression laws since 2013, and there's 26 states. And then you could also include other states that haven't, passed racist voter suppression laws, but in by law, but still basically have, like a state like Michigan, where my mom is from, that have enacted emergency managers that basically come especially into communities with a high proportion of people of color that are poor communities, and then not democratically elected folks are basically given the power to switch the Flint water systems over to the Flint River, or privatize our schools, or all of these kinds of things. And so it's more than just 26 states that have basically engaged in racist voter suppression and attacks on the democracy, but still, even if you just start with those 26 states, and then if you map out the states that have the highest levels of poverty, not just amongst African Americans and Latinos and Asians and Native people, but poverty across race. And if you look at poverty amongst young people, and poverty amongst old people, and poverty amongst women, you basically find that the same states that are passing racist voter suppression laws are then smuggling people into office, right? I'm not saying electing, because it's not really, but are smuggling people into office that then pass policies that hurt all poor people, obviously disproportionately hurt people of color, but hurt poor white people, and poor Black people, and poor Latino people, and poor Native people. And then if you look and you basically map out what are the states that have the fewest LGBTQ protections and laws on the books, it's the same states. And then if you look at which are the states that have the fewest environmental protections, it's the same states. And if you look at which states haven't passed Medicaid expansion, it's the same states. And then if you look at which states are sending the most young people to the military, basically in a poverty draft, it's the same states, right? And so you actually see this intersectionality, this interlocking injustices in these maps. And then also, if you map out which states have the highest number of people who are self-identified Protestant evangelicals or Christians, it's also the same states. Now, that could mean then, oh my goodness, we should throw religion out, right? Because clearly there is a theology that is dominant in those places that is making the Bible Belt be the poverty belt, right? That is allowing for a state like Mississippi that has more per capita churches than any other state in the country, also have, be it 49, 48, and 50 on most of the social and health and economic measures of this country, right? And there surely is that theology. And there always has been in this country and in history a battle of kind of theologies, right? Obviously, I'm a Christian scholar and a biblical scholar. I had to learn and then go and see for myself that, at Fisk University, for instance, they have copies of this slave Bible that was put together during the slavery, U.S. chattel slavery, a Bible that doesn't have the Exodus, that doesn't have the prophets, doesn't have any of the passages where Jesus is talking about coming to free the oppressed, right? And this was the Bible that was produced and distributed to folks in slavery, to the enslaved. And yet Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe and Harriet Moses Tubman, didn't just cede religion. They engaged in this kind of battle, right? And so on first glance, seeing that the same states that are passing racist voter suppression and having high poverty are states where there's a lot of evangelicals and Catholics and Christians of all stripes who are living there, and seeing that, yes, there is this kind of battle of theology where some of the most famous passages about poverty in religion are interpreted to say that God basically wills poverty, right? And you can see that in our public policy, in Alabama, this governor Roy Moore, who's now trying to be a senator or whatever, put the 10 commandments up huge, right? I mean, and again, we can just keep on going with these examples, but it also is true that there's 2,500 passages in the Bible that talk about, letting the oppressed go free, and that slave Bible that the slaveholders created basically isn't the Bible, because it's so tiny and it has so little of the actual content of the Bible. Like it's kind of heretical, right? And so I think that for myself, as someone who was raised, a devout Christian, but I was also raised a Christian who saw that my faith was linked to practicing social justice. And I was introduced from a very young age to all people across the world from various faith traditions who were engaged in a long struggle for justice, but were motivated from their faith traditions. And in the Poor People's Campaign, you have two Christian ministers who are helping to lead it. And on the one hand, that's not an accident. We're both compelled and are compelled out of traditions that actually have everything to do with kind of justice and liberation and anti-poverty, anti-racism. And we really believe that part of what we have to push back on is this distorted narrative. And this distorted narrative has really been trumpeted by Christian and religious nationalists, and who have basically kind of gotten the last word on what the moral issues of our day are. But again, if we look at our Constitution, if we look at our sacred traditions of world religions, a diverse grouping that caring for the vulnerable, organizing society around the needs of the poor, manifesting justice, the rights of women and of children and of various people are actually lifted up. They've just been politically used by those in power to for so long that sometimes we've kind of lost some of those more prophetic traditions. And so part of the Poor People's Campaign is about saying, there are real moral issues of our day, but they're healthcare and they're living wages and they're, having a decent education, and they're the fact that our sacred texts are clear that, like, it's evil to organize our society around the rich. Like that's, I mean, that's not me saying that. That's Ezekiel saying that. That's Jeremiah saying that. That's the Quran saying that. That's even, stories around Krishna saying that. This is, you know, but for so long, a smaller, powerful group of people have been able to kind of control what we understand to be morality, what we understand to be religious values, um, and we're saying, like, well, you don't get the last word.